Veeler stood in the briefing room of the human warship, watching the soldiers prepare for combat. His tall, slender frame and pale blue skin marked him as Tanny, one of the coalition's most advanced species. The humans moved around him with purpose, checking weapons and armor with repeated motions that seemed unnecessary. His analytical mind recorded every detail. The squad leader, Park Min-yu, stood at the front of the room. He was shorter than Veeler, with dark hair and sharp eyes that kept scanning his team. Min-yu's hands moved constantly, adjusting his equipment, then adjusting it again moments later. Veeler noted this as inefficient behavior. "Listen up," Min-yu said, his voice steady but tight. "The Cresvan horde has broken through the outer defenses. We're deploying to the colony surface to hold the evacuation zones. Intelligence says we're looking at heavy resistance." A woman with tied back hair checked her medical supplies for the third time. This was Choi Yuna, the unit's medic. Her fingers trembled slightly as she counted bandages and injectors. Veeler's sensors detected elevated heart rates. Throughout the room, the humans were experiencing what their files called pre-combat stress. The Tanny did not understand this concept. His species had evolved on a world without natural predators. Their emotional centers had developed differently, optimized for logic and calculation rather than survival instinct. Fear was something Veeler had only read about in xenobiology reports. Sir Yuna said, and her voice wavered. "Confirm we have air support." Limited, Min-yu replied. "The fleets engaged with their capital ships. We'll have extraction in 6 hours if we can hold the line." Veeler processed the tactical data flowing through his neural interface. He calculated survival probabilities based on enemy numbers, defensive positions, and available resources. The result was clear. Squad leader Min-yu, Veeler said in his precise, emotionless voice, "My analysis indicates a 34% probability of mission success. With current parameters, casualty projections are significant. Logic suggests requesting additional support or tactical withdrawal." The room went quiet. Several humans looked at him, their expressions difficult to read. Min-yu stepped closer, meeting Veeler's eyes. "Observer," Min-yu said carefully. "Those colonists down there don't have 6 hours. If we don't deploy, we're all they've got." "The mathematics are unfavorable," Veeler replied. "Yeah," Min-yu said, and something like a smile crossed his face, though it held no warmth. "They usually are." The squad moved to the deployment bay. Veeler observed their interactions with fascination. A large man named Kang De-jo made jokes that caused nervous laughter. A smaller woman, Lim Soo-jin, moved with quick energy, unable to stay still. They touched each other's shoulders, spoke in low voices, performed rituals that had no tactical value. "First time with humans?" Yuna asked, appearing beside Veeler as they boarded the dropship. "I have observed 17 different species in combat situations," Veeler said. "Humans display unique behavioral patterns." "We're scared," Yuna said simply, securing her harness. "That's what you're seeing. All of us are terrified." Veeler tilted his head. "Yet you proceed with the mission. This creates a logical paradox. If the fear response indicates danger, why do you not retreat?" Yuna was quiet for a moment as the dropship began its descent. The metal hull shook around them. "Because some things are more important than being safe." The Concept puzzled Wheeler, the Tanny value. System placed survival and logic. Efficiency above all else, deliberately. Choosing a dangerous path seemed counter to evolutionary wisdom. He made notes in his observation log, marking this as a phenomenon requiring further study. The dropship cut through the atmosphere with violent turbulence. Wheeler's inner ear remained perfectly balanced, his body adapted to extreme conditions. Humans gripped their harnesses, several turning pale. Minu checked his weapon again, the movement automatic and unnecessary. The magazine had been secure the previous 5 times. He verified it, 30 seconds. The pilot announced, "Remember your training." Minu called out, "We hold the Eastern Evacuation Zone. Civilians are counting on us. Watch your sectors and keep communication open." The humans acknowledged with sharp responses, but Wheeler detected the strain in their voices. Their bodies were flooding with chemical responses, preparing for violence. It seemed like an exhausting way to exist. The ship's rear door opened, revealing a landscape of smoke and fire. The colony stretched below them, buildings damaged and burning. In the distance, dark shapes moved in massive numbers. Crescent horde, insected warriors that had been pushing the coalition back for months. "Move, move, move," Minu shouted. The squad deployed with practiced efficiency despite their evident stress. Wheeler followed, his movements precise and measured. He felt nothing looking at the approaching enemy, no acceleration of circulatory function, no chemical flood, no irrational impulses, only calm assessment. The Kresvan were numerous, very numerous. Wheeler recalculated survival odds downward to 28%. The humans took positions behind defensive barriers, weapons ready. Wheeler observed how their hands still shook, how sweat formed on their skin despite the cool air, how their eyes remained wide and alert. "Here they come," Sujin whispered from her position. Wheeler recorded the moment. The humans were afraid. Their biology screamed at them to flee. Every instinct they possessed urged retreat. But not one of them moved. The Crescent charged and the battle began. The Crescent crashed into the defensive line like a wave of chittering death. Wheeler observed with detached interest as the insect warriors scuttled forward on multiple legs, their mandibles clicking with hunger. They were larger than he expected, each one the size of a human, covered in dark carapace that reflected the firelight. The humans opened fire. Minu's voice cut through the chaos, directing sectors and calling out targets. Diho's heavy weapon roared, cutting down Kresvan in groups. Sujin fired with quick precision from an elevated position. The squad worked together with impressive coordination. But Wheeler noticed something his tactical assessments had not predicted. Despite their fear, despite the overwhelming odds, the humans fought harder than Telani ever did. They moved with desperate energy, their terror somehow translating into action rather than paralysis. Left flank collapsing, someone shouted. Wheeler turned his sensors that direction. A cluster of Crescent had broken through the barrier. 3 human soldiers fell back, firing rapidly. The position would be lost in moments. Dijo hold center. Minu commanded, then moved. He ran toward the collapsing flank, not away from it. Wheeler's logic centers struggled to process this. Minu's biometric readings showed extreme stress. His survival instinct should be demanding retreat. Instead, the squad leader charged directly into greater danger. Dajo had been caught in the crescent. Breakthrough, the large man was down. One leg trapped under a collapsed barrier. Two of the insectoid creatures closed in on him. Minyu fired as he ran. His shots precise despite his elevated heart rate. He killed one crescent, but the second lunged at him. Minyu rolled, came up firing, and the creature fell. He grabbed Dajo and dragged him back toward the line. The entire action took perhaps 15 seconds. Velar calculated that Minyu's chance of survival during that maneuver had been less than 40%. Why? Velar spoke aloud, though no one heard him over the battle noise. Why risk yourself for one soldier? They Cresven pressed their attack. Yuna moved through the defensive positions with her medical equipment, treating wounded. While explosions shook the ground, she should be in the most protected location, but instead she exposed herself repeatedly to reach injured soldiers. More crescent poured from the colony buildings. They were adapting, flanking, finding weaknesses. Sujin called out movements from her high position, her voice tight with stress, but her information clear and useful. Then a group of Kavan broke through near Velar's observation point. 5 of them, moving fast, their multiple legs carrying them with horrible speed. One focused on Velar. Its faceted eyes reflected his own pale blue form. It opened its mandibles and screeched. Something happened inside Velar. His analytical mind tried to calculate the optimal response, but the numbers would not come. His thoughts scattered like leaves in wind. His body felt strange, unfamiliar. His hands moved to his weapon, but they did not feel like his hands. They felt clumsy, uncertain. The Cresven lunged. Velar fired, but the shot went wide. His normally perfect aim had vanished. The creature crashed into him and he fell backward, its weight pressed down, mandibles snapping toward his face. He could smell it, a rotting scent that filled his nostrils. For the first time in his life, Velar's mind screamed a single word at him: run. Energy discharge rang out. The crash van jerked and fell sideways, dead. Yuna stood there with a plasma pistol in her hand, her medical bag swinging from her shoulder. Move, she shouted at him. Velar could not move. His limbs would not respond correctly. His entire body felt wrong, foreign. Yuna grabbed his arm and pulled him behind cover. Her hand was small but strong, and he followed because he did not know what else to do. Stay down, she commanded. Then return to treating wounded soldiers. Her hands were steady despite the chaos, despite her own fear that Velar could clearly see in her face. The battle continued. Velar tried to understand what had happened to him. His species did not freeze in combat. They did not experience confusion. They calculated and acted with perfect efficiency. But he had frozen. His thoughts had scattered. Something had flooded through his body, something his biology was not designed to handle. He checked his internal systems, searching for malfunction. What he found disturbed him. His emotional suppression systems had experienced a cascade failure. Neural pathways that should be dormant showed activity. Chemical balances were disrupted. His body had released compounds similar to what humans called adrenaline and cortisol. He had experienced fear. The realization made his hands shake. Even more, Tani did not shake. They did not feel this crushing sensation in their chest. They did not want to flee, to hide, to escape. Minu's voice cut. Through again, extraction incoming, we need 2 more minutes, 2 minutes. Veeler's new emotional state made it sound like an eternity the humans held. They fired until their weapons overheated. They pulled wounded comrades back. They refused to break, even as the Crescent threw themselves forward in waves. Sujin fell from her position, hit by Crescent acid. Veeler watched as 2 soldiers immediately broke from their positions to reach her, dragging her to safety while Yuna rushed to provide medical care. Illogical, inefficient. They risked multiple lives for one, but they did it anyway. Finally, the extraction ships roared. Overhead, heavy guns from the vessels tore into the Cresvin ranks, buying precious seconds. The squad pulled back in order, covering each other's retreat. Veeler moved with them, his body still feeling strange and disconnected. His fear had not left. It clung to him like a cold weight. They loaded into the ships as the doors closed and they lifted away. Veeler saw the colony falling to the Cresvin below. They had bought enough time for the civilian evacuation. That was the mission. Humans collapsed in their seats, exhausted and shaking. Some laughed, the sound high and strained. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. Veeler looked at his hands. They were still trembling. Yuna sat down next to him, breathing hard. You okay, observer? I do not know, Veeler said honestly. Something is wrong with me. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, welcome to being afraid. The temporary base sat in the ruins of the colony's industrial sector. Prefabricated shelters had been erected. Among the broken buildings, Veeler remained in one of these shelters, studying his own biological data with growing concern. 3 days had passed since the battle. The humans had fallen into a routine of maintenance, rest, and preparation, but found no routine. His body continued to produce emotional responses at random intervals. Sometimes his heart would race for no tactical reason. Other times his thoughts would return to the Cresvin attack, replaying it endlessly. The Tanny had no words for what humans called nightmares, but Veeler was developing them. He tried to hide the malfunction. His mission was observation, and observers needed to remain objective. But the changes could not be stopped. Extended exposure to humans and combat had triggered something in his neural structure. Dormant pathways were activating. His emotional suppressors were failing. He was developing feelings, real, uncontrolled, illogical feelings. You've been staring at that screen for 6 hours, Minu said. Entering the shelter, Veeler looked up. The squad leader carried 2 cups of hot liquid. He offered one to Veeler. I do not require sustenance at this time. Veeler said, it's not about need, it's about taking a break. Minu sat down across from him. What are you working on? Veeler hesitated, admitting malfunction went against every Tanny instinct, but something new pushed him to speak. I am analyzing my biological responses during combat. They were abnormal. How so? I experienced fear. The words felt strange in his mouth. My species does not have this capability. Yet I felt it. I froze. I made errors. My calculations failed. Minu sipped his drink, considering. And you think that's a malfunction? Of course, emotion is inefficient. It clouds judgment. Tanny evolved past such limitations. Did you, Minu asked quietly, or did you just evolve without them? Veeler had no response. Minu set down his cup. Fear isn't weakness, Velar, it's information. It tells you what matters enough to protect. Without it, how do you know what's worth fighting for? Before Velar could answer, alarms sounded throughout the base. Both of them moved to the command center where Yuna was, coordinating with fleet intelligence. Crescent counteroffensive, she reported, her voice tight. Massive force inbound. They're pushing hard toward the inner colonies, a holographic display showed enemy movements, the numbers made Velar's new emotional responses flare. There were so many. A human officer named Seo Junho appeared on the communication screen. All units. Tactical withdrawal to secondary positions. We need to consolidate forces. Mean you study the tactical map. The bridge at Sector 7, if they take it, they'll have clear access to 3 more colonies. That bridge is already behind enemy lines, Junho said. We'd have to go through their forward positions to reach it. Then that's what we do, Minyu replied. Junho was quiet for a moment. Command is requesting volunteers only. The survival probability is 8%. 8%. Velter's new fear screamed at him. 8% meant 92% chance of death. No rational being would accept such odds. We in LT, Unk and GT, LL do it, Minyu said. Around the command center, the squad members nodded. Daeho checked his heavy weapon. Sujin, still recovering from her injuries, stood up. Yuna gathered medical supplies. A pilot named Beijai Wang started pre-flight checks. Demolitions expert called Nam Hyen Wu began preparing explosive charges. They all volunteered, every single one. Velar felt his fear growing, expanding, becoming overwhelming. His hands shook. Again, his thoughts fragmented. Everything in his biology told him to refuse to stay safe, to survive, but he also felt something else, something new and painful. He did not want these humans to die. He did not want to lose them. The thought of Yuna falling in combat, of Minyu's voice going silent, of Dejo's laugh ending forever, created a sensation. His chest that hurt more than any physical wound. I will accompany the mission, Velar heard himself say. Minyu looked at him with surprise, then something like respect. You don't have to, you're an observer. I am choosing to participate, Velar said, and his voice shook. Despite his best efforts, they moved out within the hour. The insertion was rough, dodging Cresvan patrols and enemy fire. Juin's piloting was aggressive, throwing the transport through narrow spaces and sudden drops. Velar's fear made every moment feel endless. They landed in a bombed-out sector near the bridge. Structure was massive, spanning a deep canyon. Cresvan forces were already moving across it in huge numbers. Hyen Wu studied the bridge supports. I can bring it down, but someone needs to hold those access points while I plant the charges. 10 minutes minimum, 10 minutes. Holding against the crash. Velar's calculations showed exactly how impossible that was. We'll hold, Minyu said simply. They took positions. Cresvan noticed them quickly. The insected warriors turned and charged, screeching their horrible battle cries. Velar's fear reached new heights. He could barely hold his weapon steady. The battle began. The humans fought with fierce determination. Dejo's heavy gun carved through enemy ranks. Sujin moved like liquid, firing from different positions to confuse the enemy. Yuna stayed near Hun Wu, protecting him while he worked. Velar fired his shots wild and inaccurate. His fear made everything Difficult, but he kept firing anyway. Because stopping meant watching his companions die. Contact on the south. Approach, Sujin called out. A massive group of Kreshvan emerged from the colony ruins. Too many, far too many. Sujin was exposed, caught in the open. The creatures closed in on her position. Veeler saw it happening. His fear screamed at him to stay in cover to preserve his own life. The Tanny way was survival through calculation. One life for another was not a favorable exchange, but he watched Yanwu drop his tools and sprint towards Sujin, firing. As he ran, the demolitions expert threw himself into certain death to save a teammate. Something broke inside Veeler. He left his cover. His legs moved before his thoughts could catch up. He ran towards Sujin and LT, Unk and GT's position, his weapon firing wildly. His fear was a physical thing now, crushing his chest, making his vision narrow, but he ran. Anyway, he reached Sujin as the Kreshvan closed in. His shots finally found their marks, driven by desperate necessity. Haiyan Wu arrived from the other side. Together they pulled Sujin back toward the bridge, laying down covering fire. They were going to die, the odds said. So logic said so, but somehow they made it back to cover. Somehow they survived. Charges set, Yanwu shouted, everyone back. They ran for the extraction point. The charges detonated behind them with massive force. The bridge groaned, twisted, and collapsed into the canyon, taking hundreds of Kreshvan with it. They had done it against all odds. They had completed the mission, and somehow all of them were still alive. As the extraction ship lifted away, Veeler sat in stunned silence, his hands still shook. His fear had not vanished, but neither had his companions. He had been afraid. He had acted anyway, and now he understood what Minyu meant. Word traveled fast through coalition channels. Veeler's emotional development was reported back to Tanny Command by automated monitoring systems. Within a day, orders came through. He was to return to the Telani medical ships for psychological reconditioning. What does that mean? Yuna asked when she heard. Veeler stood in the observation deck of the human cruiser, looking out at the stars. They will erase my emotions, return me to baseline function, standard procedure for Tanny. Showing signs of emotional contamination. That's horrible, she said. It is logical, Veeler replied, but his voice carried something new, sadness perhaps. I am malfunctioning. The reconditioning will restore proper operation. Minyu joined them along with several other squad members. There has to be something we can do. File a diplomatic protest. Delay the order. The Tanny will not alter their decision based on human opinion. Veeler said, and they are correct. I have become compromised. My observation data is unreliable. My combat performance is inefficient. I experience distraction, confusion, irrational attachment. Is that what you call it? Minyu asked. Irrational attachment. Veeler turned to face them. I do not wish to leave. I do not wish to forget you. These feelings serve no tactical purpose, yet they dominate my thinking. This is the definition of malfunction, or maybe, Minyu said, stepping closer, it's the definition of being alive. They talked through the night. Minyu explained concepts that Veeler struggled to process. Courage was not the absence of fear but action despite it. Friendship was not tactical alliance but genuine care. Sacrifice was not logical exchange, but giving everything for something that mattered. We're not brave because we don't feel fear. You said we're brave because we do and we act anyway. That's the difference between a human soldier and a machine. Wheeler absorbed this. But fear is painful. It makes everything difficult. Yeah, you agreed, but it also makes everything matter. Without fear, without the possibility of loss, what are you really fighting for? The extraction ship arrived the next morning. Wheeler prepared to board with a heavy sensation in his chest that he now recognized as grief. The squad gathered to see him off. They each said words that his emotional system struggled to process without causing his vision to blur. Yuna hugged him. Physical contact had been rare in Telani culture, but Wheeler found himself returning the gesture awkwardly. The transport departed, carrying Wheeler away from the combat zone and back toward Tanny space. He sat in the passenger compartment, reviewing his observations from the past weeks. The data was extensive, but the conclusions troubled him. The coalition had been studying humans incorrectly. Military analysts focused on human tactics, weapons technology, and strategic planning. They measured combat effectiveness through standard metrics, but they had missed the actual source of human success. Humans fought harder because they could lose. They protected each other because they understood mortality. Fear made them value what they defended. Love made them willing to sacrifice. These emotions, which the Talani considered inefficient, were actually humanity's greatest weapons. Wheeler accessed fleet communications as his transport traveled through coalition space. Reports were coming in from multiple sectors. The Kreshvan had launched coordinated attacks across the entire front line. The war was entering a critical phase. Then the alarms sounded. The transport's pilots spoke urgently. Crescent ambush. Multiple capital ships dropping from hyperspace. All vessels, this is Fleet Command. Emergency withdrawal protocols in effect. Wheeler pulled up tactical displays. The crash of had caught a major coalition supply convoy. The numbers were overwhelming. Talani warships immediately began calculated retreat following optimal survival protocols. Other coalition species did the same. It was the logical response, but the human vessels did not retreat. Wheeler watched on the displays as human warships, vastly outnumbered, positioned themselves between the enemy and the slower evacuation transports. A cruiser commanded by CO Junho took massive damage, protecting a ship full of colony refugees. Instead of withdrawing, Junho's vessel accelerated forward, ramming a Kreshvan dreadnought at full speed. Both ships exploded in a brilliant flash. The evacuation ships escaped because Junho had bought them time. Wheeler felt his new emotions surging. The humans were dying. They were dying to protect others. The logical response was retreat, preservation of forces, survival, but the humans chose sacrifice instead, and in that moment, Wheeler understood completely. Fear was not weakness. Fear was the price of caring, and without care, without attachment, without love for what you protected, victory meant nothing. Survival without purpose was just existence. His hands moved before his conscious mind decided. He accessed the transport's navigation systems and overrode the autopilot. The ship's computer protested, but Wheeler's security clearance as an observer gave him access. Pilot change course, Wheeler commanded. Return to the combat zone. Observer, we have orders to I am countermanding those. Orders, return to combat immediately. The pilot hesitated, then complied. The transport turned, accelerating back. Toward the battle, Wheeler felt his fear rising. Every instinct his body had developed screamed at him to turn back, to preserve himself, to survive. Reconditioning would erase these feelings and return him to peaceful efficiency. But he did not want peace anymore, not if it meant forgetting what these emotions taught him. The transport approached the battle zone. Wheeler could see human ships fighting desperately, outnumbered 20 to 1. They were going to lose. Logic said they should have retreated. But they stayed anyway, protecting the evacuation ships and civilian transports. A transmission came through. Unidentified transport, you are entering an active combat zone. Withdraw immediately. This is observer of the Tanny Diplomatic Corps, he responded, requesting permission to join defensive formation. There was a pause. Then Menu's voice came through. Velter, what are you doing? Something illogical. Velter said, something human. His transport was small and lightly armed. It would make almost no difference in the battle. His presence would not change the odds, but he came anyway. He came because he was afraid and chose to act anyway. He came because these humans had taught him that fear made courage possible. He came because some things mattered more than survival. Transport dove into the battle, its small weapons firing. Wheeler felt terror flooding through him, but he did not turn away. He had learned what it meant to be brave. The battle raged across the system. Wheeler's small transport weaved through debris and weapons fire. His fear was a constant presence now, screaming warnings with every maneuver. But he had learned to function despite it, to let it inform his actions rather than control them. Wheeler fall in with our formation, Menu's voice directed. Glad to have you back. The human squad had deployed in dropships to defend a critical defense station. Wheeler docked his transport and joined them, weapon in hand, other Telani observers monitoring. The battlefields were sending him messages of confusion and condemnation. They called him defective, broken, a danger to Telani reputation. He did not care. The squad welcomed him without hesitation. Dio clasped his shoulder. Yuna smiled despite the dire situation. Sujin gave him a quick nod of approval. They did not see his emotions as malfunction. They saw them as membership. The crash uncommitted their full invasion fleet to taking the system. It was the largest concentration of enemy forces the coalition had faced. Command centers across multiple species sent orders for strategic withdrawal. They would sacrifice this system to preserve their fleets for defensive positions closer to home. But the human admirals refused to withdraw. A woman named Hanmai, serving as a diplomatic liaison, broadcast from the Coalition War Council. Her voice carried across all channels, firm and passionate. You see our fear as weakness, Meyer said to the assembled representatives. You calculate our chances and find them unfavorable. You choose logic and survival, but here is what you fail to understand. We have never lost a war where we chose to stand despite our fear. Humanity does not win because we are unafraid. We win because we are afraid, and we fight anyway. The transmission sent waves through the coalition. Other species who had fought alongside humans began to reconsider Keelthuren cruiser captain announced. They would stay. A Vaxil assault group volunteered to hold a critical junction. More followed, the coalition forces, inspired by human stubbornness, chose to stand. The Kresvan attack was devastating. Wave after wave crashed against the defense lines. The battle stretched across 3 planets and dozens of orbital stations. Wheeler fought through the worst of it. His squad, assigned to hold a key command center. The fighting was close and brutal. Kresvan warriors breached the outer walls. Wheeler saved Dejo from a collapsing ceiling, pulling him clear. With strength born from desperation, he provided covering fire while Yuna treated wounded soldiers under direct enemy fire. When Sujin and LT Unk and GT's position was about to be overrun, Wheeler ran to her aid without hesitation. His fear was enormous. Every moment felt like drowning, but he moved anyway, fought anyway, saved his companions anyway. Other Tani were watching the battle feeds. They saw one of their own, clearly terrified, fighting within intensity they had never achieved. Wheeler's fear made every decision critical. Every life he saved meant something beyond tactical value. His emotions, rather than hindering him, drove him to greater efforts than pure logic ever could. The climactic moment came when the main command center was breached. Van warriors poured through multiple entry points. Minyu coordinated the defense, but they were being pushed back room by room. Fall back to the inner chambers, Minyu ordered. We just need to hold until the reinforcements arrive. Wheeler found himself fighting beside Minyu in a narrow corridor. The Kresvan came in waves, their numbers seemingly endless. His weapon overheated, his body ached from wounds he barely remembered receiving. His fear was so intense it became almost abstract, a constant background noise. A crash of broke through their fire line. It charged directly at Minyu. Wheeler threw himself forward, intercepting the creature. They crashed to the ground together. Kresvan's mandibles snapped at his face, just like in his first battle, but this time Wheeler did not freeze. This time his fear did not paralyze him. He jammed his weapon against the creature's carapace and fired until it stopped moving. Minyu pulled him up. Thank you, Wheeler nodded, unable to speak. His hands were shaking worse than ever, but they had not failed him when it mattered. They held the command center. The reinforcements arrived. The coalition forces, fighting with unified determination, pushed back the Kresvan assault. It took hours of brutal combat, but slowly, impossibly, they began to win. When the battle finally ended, the defense station was barely standing. Bodies of both defenders and attackers littered every corridor. The human squad had taken heavy casualties. Sujin had suffered severe wounds. Hunwoo had died protecting the ammunition stores, but they had held. Wheeler sat in the ruins of the command center, his entire body trembling with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. Yuna worked tirelessly treating the wounded. Minyu coordinated damage control. Dho helped clear debris. A transmission came through from Tani Command. They had been monitoring everything. The voice was cold and logical. Observer Wheeler, your emotional contamination has been thoroughly documented. However, your combat effectiveness exceeded all projected parameters. The War Council wishes to understand this phenomenon. Wheeler looked at the humans around him. Wounded, exhausted, but alive, they had stood against impossible odds because they cared enough to be afraid of losing. The humans call it courage. Wheeler said into the transmission, it requires fear as a prerequisite. There was a long pause. Explain. Fear is not inefficiency, it is investment. The humans fight harder because they have something to lose. They protect each other because they genuinely care. These emotions, which we believe to be weaknesses, are actually their strength. We evolved without fear, and in doing so, we lost the ability to truly value what we fight for. Another pause. Longer this time, you are requesting that your reconditioning be canceled. I am stating that reconditioning would remove the very adaptation that made me an effective warrior. Wheeler said the Tanny did not evolve past fear, we simply never developed it, and that is a limitation, not an advantage. The transmission ended. Wheeler did not know if they would accept his reasoning or force his return anyway, but he had spoken the truth as he now understood it. Minu sat down beside him. That was quite a speech. It was logical, Wheeler said. It was brave, Minu corrected. They sat in silence for a moment, watching recovery teams begin their work. What will you do if they order you back? Minu asked. Wheeler considered. His fear suggested he should comply, preserve himself, but his new emotions suggested something different. I will refuse, Wheeler said. I will request permission to remain with your unit permanently, and if they say no, then I will remain anyway. Feller looked at Minu. I have learned that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are unfavorable. This squad is one of those things. Minu smiled. You really have become one of us. In the following weeks, the Tanny began an experimental program. Volunteers would embed long-term with human units, learning to develop emotional responses. It was uncomfortable and often painful for them, but the data was undeniable. The Tanny who learned to feel fear also learned to fight with purpose. Thar remained with Minu's squad when deployment orders came for their next mission. He prepared alongside the others. His hands still shook, his fear still rose at the thought of combat, his emotional responses still made everything more difficult, but now he understood the price and the value of these feelings. Yuna found him in the equipment bay checking his weapon. Repeatedly, she recognized the nervous gesture. Scared, she asked, terrified. Wheeler admitted. Good, she said, means you know what we're fighting for. The squad gathered for deployment. Wheeler stood among them, no longer an observer, but a member. He was afraid, but he was not alone in that fear. They were all afraid. That was what made them human. Or in Wheeler's case, what made him something new, something better than he had been. The dropship's doors opened. The battlefield waited below. Wheeler felt his fear rising, familiar and constant. But he also felt determination, loyalty, and something the humans called hope. He checked his weapon one final time and followed his squad into battle, still scared, still fighting, and finally understanding why.